The night the tornado hit our town, something else came into our house with it. It never broke a window. It never forced a door. It just waited, patient and calm, in a small locked room none of us had opened in weeks. And it waited there long enough to meet our daughter before either of us ever knew it was inside. The alert tore through the silence of our bedroom, sharp and mechanical, the kind of sound designed specifically to override sleep. A tornado warning, serious enough for our county that neither of us needed to discuss what came next. We'd rehearsed this in our heads before, the way you rehearse things you never expect to actually need. Our house didn't have a basement. It was old enough that the walls were thick in places modern houses aren't anymore, and it had one long interior hallway running through its center, windowless on both sides, the safest place available to us. I went through the house quickly, pulling curtains shut, more out of some old instinct than any real belief it would matter. My wife carried our 6-year-old daughter, Lily, into that hallway, half asleep, along with the one stuffed rabbit she refused to be separated from, under any circumstance, day or night. We sat down together on the hallway floor. I remember even then, in that first quiet moment before anything had truly begun, our daughter wasn't looking at either of us. She was staring down the length of the dark hallway, past where the light from our one flashlight could properly reach, with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not fear, something closer to recognition. I didn't think much of it. I had no reason to yet. The wind outside grew violent with a speed that unsettled me more than I let on. Something struck the side of the house hard enough that the whole structure seemed to shudder, and my wife's arms tightened instinctively around our daughter. The power failed not long after that, plunging our room into a darkness so complete it felt physical, like something pressing in against us from every side. The sound outside seemed to grow immediately louder the moment the lights died, as though the dark itself had simply given the storm more room to move through the house. Our daughter went quiet in that darkness, the particular quiet of a child who has sensed, without being told, that the adults around her are frightened. My wife kept her own voice steady and low, telling her we were safe, that it would pass soon, that this room was built exactly for nights like this. I believed every word of it. I had absolutely no reason yet not to. The first knock came without warning. 3 sharp, deliberate strikes against the front door, audible even beneath the roar of wind outside, not the chaotic rattle of something loose in the storm. A knock, the kind a person makes. My first thought, and I believe my wife's too, was simple concern. Someone caught outside, needing help, needing shelter. I got up immediately, flashlight gripped tight, and made my way to the narrow window beside our front door. Nothing. The porch stood completely empty in every direction the beam could reach. Rain-slicked boards, reflecting the light back at me. No shape, no movement, no sign of anyone at all. I told myself it had been debris, something thrown loose by the wind, and returned to the room to say exactly that. My voice came out steadier than I actually felt. Lily had gone quiet, watching the door herself now, her small hand gripping her rabbit a little tighter than before. My wife pulled her in closer without a word. It came again within minutes. Same rhythm, same unmistakable deliberateness that no gust of wind, no matter how strong, could reasonably produce twice in a row with that exact spacing. I went back, more carefully this time, standing off to the side of the window rather than directly in front of it, some instinct telling me not to make myself visible from whatever might be out there. Still nothing on the porch itself, but the old porch swing, which had hung completely still moments before, was now gently swaying, the specific motion of something recently vacated, not windblown. I didn't mention that detail to my wife. I sat back down beside her in the dark, hands not quite as steady as I wanted them to be, and told her again that it was nothing. She didn't look convinced. Lily had pulled her rabbit up against her chest and gone completely silent, watching the door the same way both of us now were. We both heard it at the same instant. Footsteps, unhurried and deliberate, moving across the living room floor, just beyond the room wall separating us from it. This wasn't a house settling. This was rhythmic, purposeful, each step landing with the specific weight and pace of something walking calmly through a room it had no reason to fear being in. My wife's face went completely still in the dim flashlight glow beside me, and I felt my own expression do the same. I want to be honest about what ran through my mind in that instant. Nothing supernatural, just a simple, cold certainty. Someone is inside our house right now, and I don't know who or why or how they got in. We looked at each other for one long, silent second, both of us understanding without saying anything that neither of us wanted to be the one left behind in that room, and neither of us wanted our daughter left behind in it either. But whatever was making that sound felt in that moment more urgent than any caution. We told her to stay exactly where she was on the room floor, and we got up together to check. We moved as a pair, my wife close behind me, flashlight sweeping the room in slow, careful arcs. Furniture sat exactly where it should. No broken window, no forced door. I checked behind the couch, along both walls, inside the small entry closet near the front door. Nothing. No one. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, trying to reconcile the sound we'd both so clearly heard with the complete emptiness surrounding us. My wife's hand gripping my forearm the entire time, hard enough that I'd find faint marks there the next morning. It took perhaps 90 seconds in total. It felt like considerably longer. We turned back toward the room together, already forming the reassurance we intended to offer our daughter. That it had only been the wind, that everything was fine, that we could all go back to waiting this out together. The room was empty. Her stuffed rabbit sat exactly where she had been sitting. Our daughter did not. There is no adequate way to describe the half second it takes for something like that to fully register. The specific, sickening drop of understanding that someone who was supposed to be right there simply isn't, with no sound of movement, no door, nothing at all bridging the gap between when we'd left and when we'd returned. We said her name together, far too loud, raw panic breaking through in both our voices in a way neither of us had allowed until that exact moment. "Lily!" Nothing answered back. Just the storm, somehow louder now than it had been all night, pressing against every side of the house at once, as though it too were waiting to see what we'd do next. We split up, which terrifies me more in hindsight than nearly anything else that happened that night. But in that moment, finding her felt like the only thing that mattered at all, more urgent than any caution about what else might be moving through our home. My wife checked the downstairs bathroom, then the kitchen doorway, her voice calling Lily in a tone I'd never heard from her before. I moved through the dining room, flashlight shaking hard enough now that the beam wavered across every surface, my own voice cracking further with each repetition of her name. In one brief lull between gusts, one of those strange held-breath pockets of near silence a storm occasionally gives you, I thought I heard something faint coming from somewhere above me. Not quite a voice. Something closer to a small, private laugh, the kind a child makes when sharing a secret with someone else. I stood frozen at the base of the staircase, flashlight aimed upward into total darkness, unable to make myself climb it for several long, humiliating seconds. Before I could move, the sound of shattering glass tore through the kitchen, sharp enough that I flinched hard against the stair railing, nearly dropping the flashlight entirely. My wife's voice called out immediately, tight with a fear I had genuinely never heard from her in all our years together. I ran toward her, our daughter's name and my wife's name tangled together in my throat, no longer certain which one I was more afraid for. We reached the kitchen doorway from opposite directions at nearly the same moment. The room was empty. A single glass lay shattered on the tile near the sink, not fallen but knocked, deliberately, from where it had been resting on the counter. Nothing else in the room had been touched. We stood there together in that doorway, finally admitting to each other without needing to say a single word. This had never been the wind. Something was in the house with us, and our daughter was somewhere inside it, entirely alone. That's when we heard it clearly. Footsteps on the floor directly above the kitchen, unhurried, moving steadily toward the hallway that connected the upstairs bedrooms. I need to describe this as precisely as I can because it remains the detail that unsettles me most, even now. The footsteps weren't heavy, they weren't frantic. They were calm, almost leisurely, in a way that felt infinitely worse than urgency would have. Like whatever was making them had all the time it could possibly want, and absolutely no reason to hide the sound of its own movement from us. Outside, the storm reached what I'd later learn from the news the next morning was close to its most violent point for our entire area that night. Standing in that kitchen doorway, it felt as though our house was under assault from two directions simultaneously. One from the sky above, one from somewhere inside its own walls. My wife's hand found my arm again, gripping hard enough to hurt, and together we turned toward the staircase. Every step up that staircase felt impossibly loud beneath our own weight, each creak of old wood sounding, in that moment, like a direct announcement of exactly where we were and how close we'd come. Halfway up, my flashlight beam caught something against the hallway wall above us that made my stomach drop before my conscious mind had even fully processed what I was seeing. A shadow cast at the top of the stairs, long and utterly motionless, in the unmistakable shape of a person standing just around the corner, out of full view. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The simple certainty of its presence there, waiting, patient in exactly the same unhurried way the footsteps had been, was somehow more frightening than if it had lunged toward us outright. My wife's grip on my arm tightened until it genuinely hurt. Neither of us spoke. We kept climbing, one slow step after another, because the only thing worse than whatever waited at the top of those stairs was the thought of leaving our daughter up there alone with it for even 1 second longer than necessary. 3 steps from the landing, the shadow shifted, not toward us, not away. Just enough of a movement to suggest that whatever cast it had turned its head, slowly, deliberately, as though it had heard us climbing and was simply, calmly, acknowledging our arrival. Then it was gone, vanished the instant my flashlight beam reached the top step, leaving only an empty stretch of hallway wall where it had been. We reached the top to find the hallway completely still, every door along its length closed exactly as we'd left them hours earlier. The one battery-powered hall light flickered but held, casting just enough glow to see the full stretch of it in both directions. Empty. I called our daughter's name, quieter this time, some instinct warning me against raising my voice in that particular stretch of hallway, as though volume itself might invite something closer. For a moment, nothing answered. Then faintly, from behind a door near the far end, a small storage room we rarely opened, tucked between the 2 bedrooms, its door usually kept shut and mostly forgotten, I heard her voice, small, entirely calm, asking in the unbothered tone only a child can manage in a moment like that, if we wanted to meet her friend. I don't believe I have ever moved faster in my life than I did down that remaining stretch of hallway. The storage room door was closed, exactly the way it always was. Nothing about its frame or handle disturbed or forced in any way. I opened it to find her sitting cross-legged on the floor among old boxes we hadn't touched in months, her stuffed rabbit set carefully beside her like a guest at a small gathering, playing with something laid out in front of her that I couldn't immediately make sense of in the dim light. She looked up at us with complete calm, None of the fear my wife and I were both barely managing to hold beneath the surface. My wife scooped her up instantly, checking her over, asking rapid, breathless questions. Lily didn't seem to notice the urgency of it all. She kept saying simply and happily that she'd been playing. I asked her, as steadily as I could force my voice to be, how she had gotten into that room and who exactly she had been playing with. She pointed toward the corner of the room, calm and utterly certain, and told us she knew his name, but that she'd promised him she wouldn't say it out loud. There was nothing in that corner. No door we had somehow missed. No window. Nothing at all that could explain how she had crossed an entire hallway unnoticed, entered a room neither of us had opened in weeks, and stayed there long enough by her own quiet account to have made a friend and made him a promise. It wasn't until the days that followed that my wife and I sat down together and forced ourselves to walk back through every single detail of that night, in order, refusing to let ourselves look away from any part of it. What emerged unsettled us far more than any individual moment had on its own. The first knock had come only after our daughter had already turned to stare at the room door, meaning whatever had knocked on that door had already been near her, already had her attention, before either of us had heard a single sound ourselves. The second knock and the porch swing moving on its own came only once we'd both stepped away to check, confirming that whatever it was could move freely between the outside of our house and somewhere close enough to watch her, all without either of us noticing a thing. The footsteps in the living room, the ones that pulled the two of us away together for the very first time, had started only once we were both fully occupied enough to leave her completely unattended for those first critical minutes. The broken glass in the kitchen and the footsteps on the staircase that followed it pulled us further still, deeper into the house, away from the room, away from her, at the exact moment she was being led, or was quietly following on her own, further upward into it. Every single sound that night, every knock, every footstep, every shattered glass, had done exactly one thing with perfect, patient precision. It had moved us out of the way. We checked that storage room from top to bottom the very next morning, and every morning for weeks afterward. No hidden door, no other point of entry beyond the one we ourselves had used 100 times before. We had cameras installed within the month, covering every hallway, every entrance, every room in that house without exception. Nothing has happened since. Lily still mentions her friend occasionally in the same offhand way children mention things the adults around them have quietly, deliberately chosen not to ask further about. She still knows his name. She still won't tell us. She says every time that a promise is a promise. I know we survived that storm. I know something else was inside that house with us during those 2 hours. Patient and calm in a way that unsettles me more with each passing month rather than less. I don't know what it wanted with her specifically, or why it chose that particular night to make itself known to her and not to us. I only know it was given exactly as much time alone with our daughter as our own fear and confusion allowed it. And I have never once, since that night, stopped thinking about how easily, how quietly that time was given.